right, Carlton King, former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, what we really do in the round is we look at geopolitics. We look at what affects you as an individual in your country and what affects your community, or, just the way the everyday people, and indeed, obviously, the people that make a difference, how they function. Now, the reality of the situation is that oftentimes what happens is the normal person has not been educated to the system. So that person can't really understand how the system works. And I think that in the United Kingdom, it's particularly bad. And when I'm saying the system, I'm talking about the system of governance. Now, every United States person listening to this will say, you're wrong, we know about the functioning of our democracy and whatever democracy is. And I guess any person in China listening to it would say, we know about the functioning of our democracy. And indeed, in many other countries, be that in South Africa or be that in Australia or wherever, they're going to suggest that. And the reason why they suggest that is often because they have given to them an understanding of what their constitution is. In the United Kingdom, we don't have that. We don't have that understanding. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because today's programme is going to be about the fact that we've now got another new Prime Minister. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not against people who cannot perform the role being held to account and being thrown out. That's what a proper democracy should do, a representative democracy. The idea that we supposedly had back from I guess it's the 18th, 19th century when they started suggesting that the United Kingdom was a representative democracy. And that basically what would happen is that the citizens of the United Kingdom would vote for members of parliament, and those members of parliament would bring to the parliament the citizens' position from their particular constituency, what the citizens believe in. There was then this suggestion that what would happen is that there'd be a recall if the citizens didn't think that you were suggesting or you weren't upholding what they were suggesting. That never really happened for the pure and simple reason nobody's really taking the temperature of the citizenry around them. Now, in a way today, we've got this supposed temperature, and that's, I guess, is generally pushed by the media. And the media is making suggestions as to what they think or what they supposedly have obtained by way of journalism, and I question that word today with reporters, but they supposedly got that journalism that tells them this is what the people are thinking. Well, really what they're doing is just dip sampling. They're not really looking at what the citizens are thinking. And because the citizenry don't understand what the Constitution of the United Kingdom is, because it isn't generally written in many cases, just a whole load of stated cases and the way judges assume it was meant to be. So therefore there isn't really a stance on many things, and they only become codified when, let's say, like the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1986, somebody looks and says, this needs to be dealt with differently, and then that becomes part of our constitutional rights. So the right, example, to have a lawyer, to not be able to be questioned by police without being provided with an understanding that you don't have to say anything, etc., etc. And that's at that sort of level when you minutiae in a sense to a constitution. But that's where that is. The bigger picture about how our system works, what is the executive, what is the legislature, what is the fourth estate, etc. People don't know. So I've heard this week, when Andy Burnham's come in, the King of the North, as they call him, I've heard this week people talking about, Andy Burnham's not been voted in as Prime Minister. Well, the reality is nobody votes anybody in as Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom citizens do not have a vote for Prime Minister. So right, and the media spreads that message that basically United Kingdom citizens have a vote for Prime Minister. Well, they don't, do they? Basically, the convention is, and it is only a convention, is in the Labour Party, and the other parties have their own conventions, which are generally about the same, but the convention is that the party leader becomes the Prime Minister should that party get the first past the post amount of votes. Well, even when you look at first past the post, which is what we call our system, that means that the party with the highest number of votes in a general election in our system, well, that can be as low as 30%. I guess theoretically it could be as low as 20-odd%. If there are many other parties, and many other parties take votes away from others, and then people spoil the votes or don't vote at all or whatever, and 28% of the population were to vote for one party, then that party would have first past the post. It would have more votes than anybody else. And that party, even being a minority, so even though the other parties would say, we'll all work together to defeat that party, no, the party who's past the post first, i.e. the one with the largest percentile of votes, becomes, the governing party. And that governing party then chooses their Prime Minister. And by convention, it happens to be the party leader at the time of that vote. Well, if the party leader at the time of that vote doesn't cut it, as far as the party sees it, the party can easily change the leader. So that's what they do. They change the leader. They're not changing the Prime Minister, they're changing the leader. And because the convention is that the leader becomes the Prime Minister, then you've got to change the Prime Minister. So this is our system. I mean, it's ludicrous. But we're suggesting that citizenry have voted for a particular Prime Minister. Now, what might happen is that citizenry like the cut of somebody's jib for whatever reason, and it can be as crazy a reason as it was with Boris Johnson. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, when I say this, please do believe me when I say it, many citizens of the United Kingdom said they voted for Boris Johnson, who happened to be a Tory, so a Conservative Party member, who happened to be the leader of the party at that particular time. Many citizens voted for what they said was Boris Johnson, when actually they were voting for their constituency MP, which meant that if enough constituencies voted for their MPs, for their particular Tory individual, Tory means Conservative, for their particular Conservative person who they wanted to be an MP, because I should explain what's happened for those who are not in the United Kingdom. So what's happening at this general election is all of these MPs are up for re-election. So you're re-electing them as your Member of Parliament to that particular constituency. So if they get chosen as the Member of Parliament for a particular constituency, the numbers of Members of Parliament are added together, and the numbers of Members of Parliament in particular constituencies means that the party with the largest number of MPs becomes the governing party. Okay, so that then means that what you've got is, in the general election for the UK government, it's different with the devolved governments, it works somewhat differently, quite rightly actually. When I say devolved, we're talking about Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. So they have devolved parliamentary bodies that basically work for those countries, you can call them countries. They work with them to carry out various actions that are devolved down to those particular regional areas, those principalities, those kingdoms, or whatever you might want to call them. that they then carry out certain things for themselves within their area. England sits by itself as a bigger body. The problem is that it's skewed because England is like 85% of the population and 85% the size of the country. Well, definitely the population. And therefore, the vast majority of people voted into England, right, are in the House of Commons. And obviously then you got your Northern Ireland, your 1.5 million people, your Scots, 5-6 million people, your Welsh, 1.5-2 million people, and they have their devolved elements. So what I'm saying is, in a sense, really England dwarfs everything, which is why England hasn't got its own parliament. Because if England had its own parliament like the other three places did, that carrying out their devolved aspects, it would mean that everything would be done in England, to be fair. So what they've got is this United Kingdom body. Scots, Welsh, Irish can vote on the United Kingdom body, but the United Kingdom body, generally English bodies, can't vote on Scots, Irish and Welsh matters. And that's the Wesleyan question, which they called it. How is it fair that Scots can vote on their own things, Welsh can vote on their own things, Irish can vote on their own things, but the English never get anything to vote on their own things, so on their own issues. So therefore they were talking about devolving further, devolving it down to regions within England. And that will become a problem, I think, for the country. But they've got to work it somehow. They've got to work it that we're not a basically London-centric heavy country in terms of how things are done. So that's the problem there. So I've kind of explained that very quickly off the side from what I wanted to explain. But the other aspect, which we're still continuing to talk about because it feeds into this, is that basically you get your MPs, enough MPs voted in for your region, for your constituencies, and you then become the government, even if you are a minority against the other parties, and even if they agreed to come together to create a coalition government, it wouldn't work because you've got one clear winner. And that clear winner is that they got more than the other parties. Right. Now, sometimes, because there isn't a clear winner, and it happens very, very rarely, you have a coalition government in the United Kingdom, but you have generally a senior partner and a secondary partner. And that's what happened with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats back in the 2020s and in the 2010s, etc. They had to have this pact, and that allowed them to govern. So that's how that worked. But again, it probably was the tightest we've ever had in terms of a proper coalition. But it was a smoke-filled coalition. I guess all coalitions are smoke-filled. But it was a smoke-filled coalition insofar as the system doesn't really account for it. The system is first past the post still. So this is the big problem we've got, this first past the post aspect, because what it feeds into is it doesn't lead now to a fixed structure for a leader of government. So if we're looking at the parts of government that are generally perceived in any constitutional position, so you look at the legislature, which are those MPs. They are legislating, they are writing laws, they're making decisions on laws, they're making decisions on how we function as a parliamentary body. So that's what they are doing. Then you've got government itself. So these are, in the United Kingdom how it works, these are individuals that are generally MPs, otherwise you won't be in the government. You can be if you're a Lord somehow, so that does work, because you're from the House of Lords. But, that's another anomaly that they've got to look to. But yeah, you're generally a constituency MP, and then you're chosen by the leader of the party to become an actual government individual. So you govern centrally. So that will be you're either a minister or you are a Secretary of State under our system. So you've got the Prime Minister, then you have Secretaries of State who come underneath the Prime Minister, so the First Minister, then Secretaries of State, and then you have underneath that Ministers of State. And in most ministries, say the Home Office or the Foreign Office, or you generally have about 3 or 4 of these ministers knocking around as well, or health or whatever it might be. So you've got these, and all these are being paid, and this is important, are being paid extra money for those roles. So you're now in government, you're being paid extra money for those roles as minister, sometimes junior minister. Then you're getting paid more for a Secretary of State, and obviously the Prime Minister gets paid more. So in a time when politicians are often career politicians and not wealthy individuals in their own right, in many circumstances, not all, that extra money does count. And that extra money, and this is where it comes to be quite dodgy, can actually relate to loyalty, because you serve at the whim of the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister can sack you. So do you then speak your mind if you see the Prime Minister doing something that you don't like? Or do you keep stum just to serve in that role? One, because you want the power of serving, let's argue. Who doesn't want that? And 2, because actually it's paying your salary more than you would as a general MP. So, and then there's a pension as a government minister. If you do X amount of years, I think it was 16 before, but it's less now, you end up with a pension. And also, what you need to understand in the modern era, it gives you knowledge which you shouldn't use to enrich yourself once you come out of government, but invariably is used to enrich you. And I could tell you stories about it and have on the podcast in times gone by about an individual or individuals that have said to me that they're going to use their knowledge to make money. So you've got that. And then there are, so that's you working for a company when you finish, because as a minister, because you know what was being planned by the United Kingdom to, I don't know, in the area of defence, in the area of the environment, in the area, and this is extremely valuable to companies to understand this. You only need to look at Mandelson, okay, to understand that, how that works. So then you've got that. And then you also then have the position whereby you have always had a vision, let's argue. I'm thinking of some ministers. Want to do a great job. They've always had a vision, and their vision was to do X, Y, and Z because it wasn't working or isn't working presently. And they think they've got a vision, and they're given the brief, particularly for the Secretary of State, let's say for the Home Office, let's say for Justice. They've got a brief, and they think prison isn't right, or they think prison is right, and there should be more prisons. They then have the brief, and they can then argue for the position of actually building more prisons. Or if they think prison isn't right, they can argue for the brief of actually mothballing prisons and making some other a procedural system that goes in place rather than sending people to prison, let's say by tagging people, etc., etc. So individuals come into power because they do believe in that sort of system as well. The problem with that is that ministers, secretaries of state are often moved around. So you've got now the previous example, Secretary of State for Health, has now all of a sudden been moved to Secretary of State for Defence. Well, let's say he had a bent for health. Now he's Secretary of State for Defence. What does he know about defence? I should suggest to you nothing. Right? So now he's going to sit in front of some hard-nosed members of the general staff of the UK military, and those hard-nosed members of the general staff of the UK military are going to tell him this, this, and this, and he's going to think to himself, well, I'm not an expert. In fact, I know nothing about it. Maybe they're right. Yeah? And if they all come together and say, this is the way it should be, Minister, this is what we should be doing against Russia, for example, because Russia's a threat to us, albeit that we've been the threat to Russia rather than the other way around, right? That's the truth of the matter, and those who listen regularly will know why I'm saying that. that we're allowing our weapons to be utilised. And, this is not me suggesting that's the case. This is the former Prime Minister who's just left the role saying we are allowing our drones, we are allowing our Stormfire missiles to attack way inside of Russia, to actually attack Moscow, to attack St. Petersburg, and to kill civilians, Russian civilians. But we expect somehow, because we're saying we're doing it at arm's length, when actually everybody knows who knows anything about military, that the Ukrainians can't fire those weapons by themselves. The IRS capability by itself is non-existent in terms of firing that weaponry. So therefore they need the reconnaissance, the intelligence, reconnaissance and surveillance that allows those weapons to be targeted and fired on a certain area. And that we are providing that because those are national positions. Well, in the United Kingdom, maybe a little bit different, so it's national, but we're also tied into the US system, so there's probably US tech that they need to write to sign off before it can be used as well. That goes for our nuclear position as well. We can't utilise it without the US sign-off. So, and because we're so integrated with the US on some of those things, not necessarily in a special relationship. Let's get that right. For my mind, the only special relationship that the United States has is with the State of Israel. It does not have that with the United Kingdom or Five Eyes. What they do have is a sharing mechanism in intelligence. And I've worked that mechanism and it is good. Don't get me wrong, I'm not arguing that it isn't very good. But we are giving up way more than we're obtaining from it. And our position of what's special to us is less than special to the United States. As I say, the only special relationship within the United States is that for the State of Israel. And the power comes about because of that for the State of Israel. So let's be realistic about these things. And this is one of the things I want to talk about throughout this now, after I've just gone through the process. So this Defence Secretary has been told, this is what you need to do. Bum, 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 bum. What he isn't probably doing is looking and saying, well, what happens if we keep hitting these Russians and then President Putin turns around and says, we need to teach the British a lesson. Let's fire something against them. How do we defend ourselves? If he's asked that question and the truth came back to him, the truth should be, Secretary of State, we don't have the capability to shoot down any of the Russian missiles should they be sent to us. Not even mentioning the fact of the Reznik. So I'm not talking like top grade, I'm talking general weapons. We just don't have their defence systems in place. So if they did choose to attack us, frankly, there's nothing we could do about it. Right. Is he asking that question? I suggest to you he probably isn't, because he doesn't want to look stupid. And he's taken from the chiefs of the defence staff what they're saying to be true, and probably also from the intelligence and security chiefs in the Secret Intelligence Service and in the Security Service, definitely in the Secret Intelligence Service, because they tend to be anti-Russian. So because of that, they're given a skewed perspective. Okay, so how does this guy, who's not a knowledgeable individual in the field, how does he turn them away and say, bang, bang, bang? Sorry, that's not the way it is. Now, under the system, the reason why they have civil servants, and particularly high-ranking ones, is because they're meant to say to that minister, yeah, I know what the Chief of Defence Staff is saying to you, Minister, Secretary of State, but actually that's not true. It's this, this, this and this. But because that position now of the highest ranking civil servants has been to some extent often usurped by what they call SPADs, special advisors, the civil service power is much more limited. And I'm knowing that having spoken to some of these guys and gals who are at that high civil service level, that they don't want to say something that they think the minister wouldn't want to hear, and that his SPAD hasn't told him or her, and that the experts haven't told him or her. So in other words, they are on a sticky wicket, because they may well be experts, because they've been there for so long, but they too are being moved around, so maybe are not experts. So again, they follow the line of the expert and the prejudice of the expert, and so you get that problem. So I mentioned this because I just want to finish this bit about Russia, etc., and the defence secretary, because he's been moved, that's all. I mentioned this bit because we now have the Iranians saying they will attack Fairfield RAF base, which is basically actually a US Air Force base. It is actually a US Air Force base, but we call it RAF to give it a position of I guess, some homegrown perspective. But when you go there, and I work for the American military, it will be the US security police that are securing the area, in reality, behind the one or two RAF regiment people who might be stationed there. But really, all of it's run by American. So the reality is that we're allowing B-1 bombers to fly off from there to bomb Iran. A decision made by this Prime Minister, seemingly the new Prime Minister, by Andy Burnham. The Iranians, who clearly are not playing on other closer allies of the US and attacking US bases, have said, right, now you've opened that base to attack by us. Now maybe the position of Andy Burnham was the Prime Minister, maybe he was told the Iranians don't have the missiles, the equipment that will be able to hit that base. Okay, in England. Now, I question that analysis because we don't know what the Iranians are being given, and I'm saying that from an intelligence perspective. I would believe we do not know, even though we will have some penetration into Iran, but we will not know what the Russians, and more particularly advancedly technology-wise, the Chinese, particularly in terms of their Badu system, their tag system, what they have been provided by those two countries that will allow the homegrown Iranian missiles to actually travel the distance, because they did say they had some long-distance missiles, but travel that distance in a targeted fashion and hit spot on where it wants to. We're seeing more evidence that they are capable of that. Now, initially, our fear was that they would attack the RAF base, okay, in Cyprus. That was our initial fear. The suggestion might now be, from the Iranians themselves, that they have longer range capacity than what we presently think they do have. So they can hit that US base in the United Kingdom. But more importantly, also, they can hit the factories that are creating the drones, that are creating the Storm Shadow missiles, that are creating cruise missiles, that are creating these elements, if they're being used in Iran. So this point then comes that if the Iranians do carry out such an attack, even if that attack is in Cyprus, say, right, on Akrotiri, let's argue. So if that attack is carried out by the Iranians, what do you think the Russian public will be saying and pressuring their country's governorship, i.e. President Putin's party? What do you think they will be saying to him? We are taking hits every day from British weapons. We know we are because the British Prime Minister stood up and said we are aiding Ukraine to attack Russia daily. The British Prime Minister said that, Starmer. Okay? That's what he said. He's been loud and clear and he said it. So they're aiding them to hit us every day. You, President Putin, are doing nothing about that. Where is our deterrence? Where is our deterrence? Iranians get hit once from American planes flying from a British airfield, right, which they call RAF, so even worse, they call it an RAF base, although it's an American base, but they call it RAF base, and they hit Iran once, and Iranians are firing back at them. Where's our balls? Why do we not have the cojones to fire back at the British and teach them a lesson. I can see that all day long being pressured on Putin. And I can see people like Medvedev saying, yeah, I've been saying this for months. In fact, he's been saying it for years, that we should be hitting them back. Right? So Medvedev is saying that. He's a senior post in the government. The man stopping it is obviously Putin. So why do we want Putin in power if he ain't got the balls to defend us? Okay? And hit them back at the British and teach the British a lesson. Because Britain's shouting loud that we're doing this. I'm noticing an example that the Spaniards say, we're not part of this. The Spaniards are making it clear, we're not part of this. We don't want anything to do with it. Right? So they're making it clear to whomever might want to take some action against them that they're not part of that process. Right? Okay, so you've got the Germans who are shouting loud under Merz, who themselves will be a target, probably even more so than the United Kingdom because of the returned hatred against the German for killing 27 million Soviets and the rest, I would suggest, many of whom were Russians, a very large percentage of whom were Russians. So, again, you've got this angle of people then thinking to themselves, why is he not doing something? So, what I'm saying is, in looking at the United Kingdom as a political entity, right, these are the decisions that the Prime Minister, the First Minister of the government, seems to be making. Now, under our system, the reality is he shouldn't be making those decisions in isolation. He should be making them as a collective. But I'm going to argue that probably since Maggie, and definitely since Margaret Thatcher, and definitely since Tony Blair were Prime Minister, that we've had much more of an presidential perspective. Number one, as I said to you before, the media suggests to the public that they're voting for a Prime Minister. So, in some areas, you can stand a clown, and I mean literally a clown, with a Conservative rosette on or a Labour rosette on, and that clown will be voted in because the individuals who are voting in a general election have got a skewed understanding of what they're voting for and are voting for the person who's the leader of the party rather than voting for the local MP. When actually all they're really voting for is the local MP because we don't have a vote for who's going to lead the country. So this is the first point I'm making. Maybe it's about time that we did have a vote for who should lead the country. Maybe we should have a vote for who is going to be the Prime Minister, and that the Prime Minister shouldn't necessarily come from the party in government. That way, probably, we would get a semblance of, as it's meant to happen in the United States, and you can see how it goes wrong with Trump, that even that doesn't necessarily work, because even though you have that position in the United States where you vote for your senators and you vote for your representatives and you vote for the president separately, and therefore you can have different parties running different parts of those houses, as we would perceive them, the House of Commons, the House of Lords, as we would perceive it loosely, but that's how it's perceived, and then the government. We would, you can have different parties in those roles, so it means that, as they call it in America, cross-aisle activity needs to happen. So people need to come together from different party extremes and talk to each other to suggest that we will function in this way and allow you to get laws through. Now, actually, the way Donald Trump has done it, frankly, he doesn't care about either body. Doesn't care about the Senate and doesn't care about the House of Representatives. He don't care. It means nothing to him either, because the American system has allowed him to get away with that. Has allowed him to actually go to war without having the authorization, as it should do, by the legislature. Right? So as the executive, he said, we're going to war. The legislature is meant to say, oh, you can go to war, particularly if it lasts longer than 60 days. They should go to the legislature, and the legislature should say, no, you can't go to war, or yes, you can go to war. There's the votes. But no, it's not working. Why? Because Donald Trump has basically torn up the Constitution. Just stamped all over it. So yes, even if we had a system that I'm suggesting that at least we voted for our Prime Minister, so we could actually say that is who we actually voted for. And it's a simple job. You could have basically the ballot that says, vote for your MP and vote for who you'd like to be Prime Minister. It's simple. It's not difficult. It's an easy thing to do. They'd then just have to work out how that functioned. But we don't. So what the British public tend to do is they tend to turn around and say, I'm voting for Boris Johnson because he makes me laugh. So how do I get Boris Johnson into power? By voting for Tories, Conservatives. So I'll vote for the Conservative. So he votes for the Conservative Party. And then they turn around and say, he's a laugh, but he's wrecked our system. Maybe some people probably still don't. So now we're going to vote for the next Prime Minister. This is what the public's doing. So who's the next Prime Minister? We vote for this guy as Prime Minister. So they don't care about what the constituency MP is doing, and they vote for the next guy Prime Minister. But the only tick they can make is against the party of the Prime Minister. So they tick, we're now voting for Labour. Right? And that's the way it's working. So one side to the other, one to the other. And there's a British programme. There used to be two guys, so give it to you, give it to me, sort of thing. Either way, strange type of programme it was anyway. I probably got it wrong as well. But the point is that what I'm saying is that where's the consistency in the process and the procedures? There isn't, because people are voting for something they're not actually voting for. And I think that makes sense now. I've explained it to you. So what's the other tier of our constitutional position? That's meant to be the fourth estate, the media, and obviously we've got the political elements, in our case, the Church of England, etc., who also play a role in how we function, particularly in the House of Lords. So again, you're getting perspectives from individuals with religious bent, which includes Judaism and now beginning to include Islam in it or whatever, with a religious bent, who have their views potentially based on their religious feelings. And those are being pushed into our body politic. So for me, I think the tradition that we have had, and take into account that when we were voting, back in the 18th, 19th centuries, that very few British men actually had the right to vote. In fact, all the way up to the First World War. I said in the last programme, I think, that up to about 70% of individuals who fought in the First World War for the United Kingdom had no right to vote in the United Kingdom, because at the time, all the way through up to the 1919, it was property-owning classes and various individuals, and there were some nuances that even if you didn't own property, but you were in certain roles, that you could have a vote. But that was by no way, shape or means universal suffrage. Okay? For one, no woman was voting, and probably only about a third of men were able to vote under that system, and you had to be 21 years of age, etc., etc. So there was no universal suffrage ever in that system. And indeed, the first suffragettes didn't ask for universal suffrage. They asked for actually the right to vote in line with the power dynamic of the men who could vote. That third of men, it was meant to be the third of women, often their wives, who should be able to vote. So that's what they're asking for. They weren't even asking for universal suffrage, the vast majority. So that's where we are. So our system hasn't grown, is what I'm trying to say. And the other negative thing about our system is that it's too often skewed to the past, to our imperial past. The United Kingdom was the greatest empire the world has ever seen. I'll say that, and I'll say it till the cows go home, right? The greatest empire the world has ever seen. 1/3 of all people on this earth were part of the British Empire. Okay? Now, they were told that they had every right, exactly the same rights, as any Englishman or any Scotsman or any, notice I'm saying man, or any Irishmen, and then how limited that was for the Irish, and any Welsh person. So they were told, the people in empire, you have all these rights, okay? You have them. You can travel to any part of that empire because you are a citizen of empire. People don't understand that. That's all the way through until about 1968, to be fair. You are a citizen of empire. You have a right to travel wherever you want, live wherever you want in the empire. The problem is that parts of the empire started to change and say, no, you don't. It wasn't the United Kingdom itself who was doing. Other parts, say Australia, Canada, New Zealand, they're saying, no, you don't. You don't have the right to stay here, mate, because you're from Indian subcontinent, we don't want you. Or you're from Africa, and we don't want you. So those dominion status places, that means parts of the British Empire that were relatively self-ruling, not self in terms of defence or in terms of outward politics, but relatively self-ruling, started turning around internal policy, started turning around and saying, no, we don't want these, or these. Okay. And then after the Second World War, it all fell apart, to be fair, for the vast majority, because people sought their independence from in these particular countries. And oftentimes because of the exploitative factor, well, not often, totally, because of the exploitative factor of the empire. Because, let's face it, if you've got an empire but you aren't making any money from it, what's the point of it? So it does exploit people to make money, and it brings it back to the mother country, in our case, the United Kingdom. Actually, to be fair, in many cases, England. So that was as it was perceived when the empire was created. And then Scotland, of course, later on, and then, England, read for that, Wales and England. So what you're really saying is that we haven't grown. We haven't grown from that imperial time and that outward bound view about how we can take things from other places and how we're great and how we can control the world, how it functions, to actually, when I say grown, you could even say shrunk, to shrink back into what we actually are, which is a small island off the northern coast of the European landmass. Now, there's nothing negative about that. The problem is we perceive it as negative, and more importantly, our rulers perceive it as negative. They want to play on the world stage as though they're Winston Churchill. And by the way, when Winston Churchill was playing on that world stage, we were bankrupt. That's the reality of it. We were bankrupted in the First World War, funnily enough, by Churchill and others when he was the Treasury. Bankrupted, trying to play empire, because you could only see the wealth we were getting from empire, but we couldn't see the cost of empire. We were dragging wealth out of empire, for sure, but it began to be that the people who were making the wealth wasn't distributing it fully for the nation. It became their wealth. So we were losing in wealth. Yes, you had this imperial system that people in empire could only buy British, etc. And that, aided us. But it also made us, I would argue, lazy, and made us industrially less capable, because you could produce any old shot, German word for rubbish, and you could sell it to the empire because they had to buy from within the empire. The general rule of empires, French, Dutch, blah, blah, whatever empire you want to look at, Roman, even going back all those years, the empire sustains itself by having its own internal market. So that's the way it was working. But it allows for people to get fat and lazy. I don't necessarily mean that literally, but I mean that in the sense of capacity. And it allows you to cut corners, and it allows you to sell and just make a nice living, particularly for the central state, i.e. in this case, the United Kingdom, England in particular, the city of London in particular, to narrow it down even further. And then that means that other places don't get the rub that they should do in empire, and so they want to leave. Now, we're honing it in, aren't we? We're coming in. This is exactly the same with the north of England. Once the north of England could not compete because of this, we only need to do so much and we can sell to wherever in the world and we get the raw materials cheap or for free, and then we'd sell back the finished goods to them, be they great or be they not. And to the rest of the world, which is that 1/3 of the world and that 1/3 of humanity we're selling back to. Once that goes, now you're in competition with everybody. So where do you go? Now, countries that haven't had that or had that taken from them, hence the Germans, and hence speaking the German, right? You cannot sell rubbish anymore because you don't have your empire. So therefore, you have to be cutting edge to sell. And so the Germans sold cutting edge goods. Right? So once these people become independent, they want cutting edge goods because frankly, the cutting edge goods aren't any more expensive than the rubbish they were buying. Right? Because now it's India no longer needs to buy from the United Kingdom. It can buy from wherever it wants. Doesn't need to buy a Morris Minor. It can buy a Mercedes. Right? And Mercedes is better. So this is what you get. Now, the French tried to hold on to this, and to be fair, have held on to this position quite successfully, even once the nations have become independent. We've tried to hold on to this. The British, in a way, before leaving, setting up systems in those countries that are going to get their independence, that basically means you favour the old colonial body, the old colonial power. The French went a touch further and made sure that the banking systems that they had to be part of, particularly in Africa, required them to be part of the banking systems, required those African states to put their monies into the banks in Paris and to leave 3/4 of their monies in the bank in Paris, and only to be able to get their money if the French allowed them to take it out of the bank in Paris, and only so much in the bank in Paris, and also did deals with them that French companies could get whatever they needed out of the raw materials, because they basically corrupted the leadership of those countries. So the leadership was doing very well, thank you very much, but the people were out of pocket, right? So this is how empires tried to hold on to the situation, and we weren't that much different, to be fair. Maybe not at the level of the French, but not that much different. So I could see why there's this outward bound perspective, because the outward bound was still making money. So abroad was still making money. So for us, we then renamed it the Commonwealth, a way of hopefully controlling what happens. No, we weren't controlling what happens, because the Commonwealth isn't controlled by the United Kingdom. But it did give us some feel of power. And for a Prime Minister to be somebody on the world stage, that is important. But the other factor that made Britain still great was the banking system and the insurance system. Both systems put in place actually by the British under the old system, but usurped by the Americans post the Second World War. But nevertheless, the city still had a lot of power. So Britain could actually function by its monies from the city. But what did that do to the United Kingdom? What it did is it skewed the London-centric perspective even more so. So basically the city was deciding the longevity of actions that should be taken by British companies. Do you make me money today and in, a year or two's time? Yes, brilliant, whiff your gate, mate. Go ahead, we'll lend you the money. Go ahead, we will support you. Oh, you want to make money for me in 10 years' time? Oh, sorry, mate. Not interested, right? Whereas China, state-run capitalism, they turn around and say, we're going to make money in 10, 20, 30 years' time doing this because we will totally control the market. Electric cars, example. I was there in 2000. Well, I've been there many, many times, all the way from, let's say, 2006 all the way through to 2011, 12. And I saw planning that they were planning to run electric cars throughout the world. Throughout the world. It was a 30-year plan, right? In sections of 5 years. To first get the cars, batteries, systems, learn from whomever's got the best tech, overtake that tech, break that tech to ours, etc., etc., etc. Okay? And then what do you become? You become the best in the world at it. because you've got a long view, not a short view of what makes money for the few now. Okay? That's your difference. So there's countries doing that. Germans did that to some extent, albeit they seem to have gone down more the short-term view. But, for many a year, the family companies that generally ran much of Germany's power after the Second World War, those were thinking long-term for their family. Let's make more money, blah, 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 blah. Family enterprises. But I think that's gone to much extent now. It's gone. And they have fallen foul of the quick, short-term buck, learning from the United States and people who went out to the States, people who've had their head turned in the States, people who may well be agents of United States bodies who are now turning Germany into a fast buck system, which has undermined its whole premise and has undermined the system. The other factors are, which people don't want to really talk about, there's the external view which we have of the world. So therefore, it's not negative to have external people in the country who can feed into the external view of the nations that we want to sell goods to, etc. Right? So you get your immigration. But the bigger point of immigration isn't that really. The bigger point of immigration is that in the West, people are not having children. We move from, I'd say, an average of 3 children, maybe even 5, down to an average of 1 child, 1.2 children, Germany less even. So you need, and I'll say it again, you need other populations to be able to pay for the great systems that you've got of welfare, etc., etc. And because the indigenous are not willing, in many cases, to work for nothing or for little, you basically are happy to take somebody who is willing to work for less because they've come from lands where they still have to struggle and strive, and they've still got ethics that are struggle and strife, whereas we've got, if you want to take it back to the Roman Empire, I could just as easily use the Egyptian Empire, but let's take the Roman Empire. The senators in Rome have all got fat and lazy. And to be fair, even the vaunted military's got lazy because the generals are making so much and the generals are becoming the emperors, etc., etc. So you see what happens is that, taking historical perspectives and Britain, is that people get lazy and people then look at actually looking after themselves. So even the systems around them are quite difficult. Part of the charter, and I'm not telling you anything secret, so part of the charter written as it was in 1994, I think it was, for the Secret Intelligence Service, better known as MI6, was to uphold the economic well-being of the United Kingdom. And that was done by obviously looking at finding out intelligence for British companies. So let's say Jaguar. You wanted Jaguar to get the best information from companies around the world. And if you could get intel from around the world that allowed you to make Jaguar a better engine that could sell for the United Kingdom, and so the United Kingdom could get profits off Jaguar, etc., etc., because that's the home country, then, that intel would be good for the Treasury. Okay? Economic well-being. And I just take Jaguar with a lot of other companies. Right. What do you do, though, when Jaguar is no longer British? And indeed, when, in terms of making cars, there isn't a single British car company that's mass-produced. Right? That produces cars en masse. Not a single one. So that angle of the economic well-being has gone. And when you do that through many other industries, you will see that with many other industries. They're not British. They're owned by foreign companies. Because what's happened is, in that run for money in the city, they're looking at short-term deals, and those short-term deals make money. Don't get me wrong. Somebody buys this company. Okay, so it comes from India. Who cares whether Jaguar is owned by an Indian company or an American company, or British Steel is owned by an Indian company? This is Tata. Who cares? Who cares? Right? We're making money individually. right? That's the perspective. And government has to play into that. And as I said earlier on, because money is now everything, not necessarily status, so the people in government want to make money. The status comes with being of a power at a level of a worldwide player. So you start playing worldwide without the backup, right? So you're a worldwide player on the world stage, and people say, oh, the British here, what they're going to suggest. So you're the Prime Minister, bang, oh, you're the Foreign Secretary, oh, yeah, you're important. But actually your country's dropping all the time. And it's dropping because the reality is that, yes, the city's still making money and the system is skewed to the Western system presently. That's beginning to fall and break. And when it does, we're going to be in a whole heap of trouble, as is the United States, by the way. That system's beginning to fall, that Western-run system that was put in place after the Second World War, funnily enough, in Britain. That system is beginning to fall away. And when it does, and the other parts of the world, which are far greater, actually start controlling much of the monetary system themselves, all of a sudden we will clamber down in importance. And nobody wants that. You know, no Prime Minister wants to be less important than the fella before him or the woman before him. And, you know, this was why the United Kingdom absolutely wanted to make sure that NATO remained after the fall of the Soviet Union. Because if NATO fell, what were we any good at? What were we important for? So therefore, we basically wanted for NATO to remain. Okay? Margaret Thatcher in particular. I know this because, you know, I was given the task to find out what Lothar Messier, the last Minister President of East Germany, what his thoughts were on things. You know, so I was talking to the fella when I was protecting him. And, you know, I'm a special branch officer, which is an intelligence officer, and I'm reporting back saying, you know, this is a report, this is what he thinks, you know, these are the positions. You know, these are the positions on what the East Germans think when they reunite with the West Germany, what they think will happen. You know, this is the reality of it, because you need as a Prime Minister to understand the thoughts and understandings of individuals, of leaders, as to where your country's going to sit. But, you know, some of that's for vanity is what I'm saying. Some of that is because you're vain. Some of that is because you don't want to fall down the ladder. Some of that is because you want to sit at the right-hand side of the President of the United States, albeit that you're only sitting at the right-hand side of the President of the United States as long as you're doing the bidding of the United States. The moment you stop doing the bidding of the United States, or the United States has no interest in the bidding that you're doing, then you're out. Now, my latest book called Seeking Jerry, just come out, just written it. My latest book will tell you that. You know, I had to get a British minister during the war in Iraq to Iraq in order that we could put down our claim for, you know, the spoils of that war. The American wasn't helping us because the American wanted the spoils of that war for himself, for his own country. We aided putting the second biggest contingent, yes, much smaller than the United States contingent. You know, United States contingent, depending on how you count it, was something like 380,000 to 500,000 individuals. Our contingent was about 30 odd, 40 odd thousand, but it was the second largest contingent, you know, particularly in military, for sure. And we did get the position of running the country as a secondary element to the American. And I was even offered the job as to be head of the Iraqi secret police. You know, so what I'm saying is this is the political games that we play to try and raise the position of the United Kingdom. But oftentimes it's vanity. That's what I'm trying to say. Oftentimes you'd have been better just sitting out of it. The Germans sat out of it, but the Germans came in and got actually more contracts than we did. This is the point I'm making. Why? Because the Germans were making things that people wanted and had the reputation that, you know, when they built a power station, it would work. When they built trains, they would work. When they were to build, let's say, Mercedes vehicles or VW vehicles or whatever it might be, they would work. When they were creating the radios that the Iraqi police would use, they would work, right? Because Germany was the byword for excellence in electronics, excellence in building of motors, massive motors, excellence in engineering in general, excellence in a whole host of areas. We didn't have that. We did not have that. So it's all right playing on the top table, but when you come to getting the spoils, you've got to have something. You have to have something. But if you don't have it, where do you work? Now, of course, we did some city deals. Of course you would. A few oil deals. Yeah. But nothing to the level of people that weren't even combative in that war, but came afterwards, like the vultures do after a war, to take and eat the flesh off the country and get money and get rich out of it. Because that's what war's about. So the point I'm making is, surely the United Kingdom needs to be cuter. Surely the United Kingdom, under our new Prime Minister, if he's going to do anything, he needs to, this gimmick, and I'm not jumping away, but this gimmick of saying number 10 North is a gimmick. If you really want to increase regional power, then increase regional power, how the Germans do, and have regional centres that, so Frankfurt banking, Berlin central government, München looking at industrialisation and Stuttgart automobile, etc., etc. You've got areas, Hamburg for shipping and shipbuilding, etc., etc. You've got areas that are clearly defined, and that also went into the East. They did that when they took the East over to try and give the East areas that they are functional in, right? That was former East Germany when they took that on board. It cost them, trillions, but they took it on board and tried to give them an area of capacity which they could deal with. We haven't done that. We've played at it. So if the Prime Minister really wants to do something and really wants to spread the wealth outside of London and the South East, he's got to start doing things like that. Moving number 10 there now and then actually just costs. The cost, I ran the Office for Protection, so I know exactly what it costs. The cost of now protecting that area, number 10 North, is probably more than there's going to be any gain. You're going to have ministers travelling up there. You're going to have people staying there. You're going to have policing up there increased, to secure the area that they're going to utilise. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, these things have got to be thought through. It's not good enough to just do knee-jerk stuff that looks good in the papers for 2 minutes, because the papers will still hammer you. They'll still hammer you. Particularly the press that is Tory-orientated is going to hammer you no matter what you do, right? And the Labour paper-orientated papers are going to say you're not left enough, I would imagine, in many cases. But the people are the ones who are going to suffer, because you're not going to see anything but gimmick. So my argument is dead simple. Properly assess where the United Kingdom sits in the world. Get out of involving ourselves in wars. Get out of that game. It's a pointless game. Do not increase the budget for the military. It's not required. If anything, you could turn around and argue, okay, let's have 2 nuclear capable, by nuclear missile capable bolts, submarines, rather than 4 or 6 is coming up to. If we're going to do aircraft carriers, which we've done, I see no reason why we've done them, but we've done them, right? I mean, waste some money, but we've done it, so it is where it is now. Actually make sure they work properly. Make sure they work. And as I say, if we're going to have expeditionary forces fighting, which we shouldn't have, because my argument is don't do it. Actually make sure the lads get what they actually need. Helicopters, proper body armour, etc., etc., proper rifle. Make sure those things work for the infantry, right? Because they weren't working when we were in Iraq and in Afghanistan. They weren't working. We have no missile defence. Okay, so we're going to go into drones and make drones. But that's offensive. What about defensive? What about our defensive capability if we're going to do that? But again, that doesn't need to be done at the expense of creating an enemy. Unless, of course, this is the big one, actually you're creating an enemy, Russia, subsequently China, right, to spend more money on the military because you're getting a cut out of it. Politicians. Because you are saying, okay, well, I'll get some shares in this company. Or when I leave, I'll work for the company. This is what happens in the United States all the time. When they leave, they're working for these companies. But it's a dead end for their people. And we don't want to copy the United States down that road. We don't want to spend what the Trump administration is trying to do now, spend $1.5 trillion on their military, but their people can't get a hip operation unless you're wealthy and you've got up to the hilt private insurance. We don't have that system and shouldn't want it. We should be looking after our people. And actually, press, media, the first task of the government absolutely is to look after its people, but not in the military. It's its people at home. If anything, you want to increase your police. You want to make sure that your police can function without every second people frankly doing their legs. It's a British statement, meaning that undermining their activity. Saying that, the police didn't do anything with this shoplifter. How can the police be in every shop in the high street in every town in the country? Or the police didn't do anything about rape? How can the police investigate every rape when rapes are now coming in from perspectives that they never came in from before? And if it goes in front of a court, how can a court deal with the issue if you are dealing with other issues when somebody's writing on a keyboard saying, I don't like this or I don't like that, and the police are investigating that and looking at somebody's computer when actually they should be looking at somebody's phone who's been involved in raping somebody maybe. But of course, what's the priority? The priority might have been at that time, somebody wrote something that we don't like, or the government say that they don't like about some part of some community, so therefore we want to look at that closely. So that's where the police are running to on that particular day. The next day, it's, you need to look at this issue. So the police are running to that issue on that day. The next day, it's, as I said before, some shoplifting you want to look to. So the police need to look to shoplifting. Sure, the police need to turn around and say, listen, we can only do so much. Make your decisions. Number one, you don't need a police officer to come to every shoplifting. You can simply make a store detective a deputy in the store. He can arrest people, he can send off the information, he or she, to the CPS, and the CPS can do their work. You don't need the police involved in that. So therefore, you now got a private industry carrying out private work to deal with it. Other side to the coin, you don't need to throw everybody in prison. There's now adequate capacity to deal with individuals by way of electronic monitoring. I know personally that a new electronic monitoring system that actually doesn't go on somebody's ankle, it goes on their wrist. Right? Electronic monitoring system goes on their wrist, it tells you everywhere where they are, it checks their blood, it checks their heart rate, it checks alcohol, if they take that, it checks for everything. But the British government don't take it on. Why don't they take it on? You tell me. Why wouldn't you take it on? But it's not taken on. Because vested interest is in place. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's too much vested interest in the United Kingdom. There's too much legacy interest, too much traditional interest. We need to, and Prime Minister, this is to you. I know you don't listen to the poem, but if you did, or somebody in government who's listening to the programme, Prime Minister, actually throw away legacy. Actually start looking at what you've got, how you've got it, have your secretaries of state look at what they've got, what is capable in the United Kingdom. I hear it from everywhere. I hear everybody turning around saying, we're trying to create this, we're trying to create that, we're trying to create whatever, but the United Kingdom isn't interested. So what we've done is we've taken it to the United States. How can that be? How can our best and brightest, and there's a question though whether just because you're bringing something into play that you're the best and brightest, but let's use that terminology because people like it, our best and brightest are taking over the ideas, concepts, things that function, and actually creating them in the United States and making them a United States company and selling them in the United States. And indeed, many more now starting to move to China and other places, right? And they're no longer being United Kingdom companies because United Kingdom's too legacy in everything it's doing. It's too looking back to tradition, looking back to what we were rather than actually dealing with what we are and what we can create now, what we can do now, where we need to put our money now. Those extra billions that you're talking about putting into the military could be going into the industrial capacity of the United Kingdom. In many ways, new cutting-edge industries. You know, the latest quantum issues. The latest of everything. You know, opening up to what is now, not what was. So that would be my sentiment, my position on the latest new Prime Minister. I've gone through quite a bit. I hope you've understood why I've gone through things and in what detail I've gone through things in. Frankly, because we're playing a dangerous game externally to the United Kingdom and we're batting with a poor bat on a poor pitch internally to the United Kingdom. And our people are getting restless in all facets. Our employees in many industries, in the public sector, from the police to the health service to education, are being burnt out because of nothing but continued criticism, and that's felt particularly the most within the police. And you know, Winston Churchill in 1919 didn't make a law that the police could not strike for no reason. He made that law and got that law passed. Well, he didn't make it. He got that law passed through government at the time, through Parliament, at the legislature, through Parliament at the time, because he saw firsthand what happens when the police don't function, when the police strike. You can have a strike in the National Health Service, which we've had loads of times. You can have a strike in the military. You could have a strike in education, which you've had loads of times. You can have a strike in any industry you want, frankly. Right? Nothing will happen within an hour of that strike. If you have a police strike and they can't strike, but if you did, right, you would find that within 2 hours of that, there would be mayhem in the country. And I do mean mayhem. Right? So why, for such a critical, and forget, I was part of the Secret Intelligence Service, knew the security service, forget that, forget it all, it doesn't matter. You could do with both of those organisations, don't get me wrong, they'd do a great job, you could do with both of those organisations, it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference within weeks. You stop the policing, and within an hour, I'm telling you now, you will have mayhem on the streets because everybody will know it's open season. You can take any TV you want. You can take any car you want. You can do anything you want. And because we're now a society that's all about what you have and not what you don't have, okay, it's the immediate, the now wealth that matters, right? So don't undermine this body of men and women who actually, in general, do a very, very good job. Because I'm saying this in closing, because talking to officers now, you can't recruit them. And if you do recruit them, they're staying for 5 years. So they've little expertise when they leave in anything. And so the newest people coming on board are being taught by people with 2 years in who want to get out themselves. You can have all the senior officers you want, but if you don't have the guys down on the street being able to do the work, the guys and gals there, it's pointless. You're undermining the whole system. So you undermine the whole credibility of your society because, as the Greeks said, it's the police society that make the society function. Right? Yes, they asked who will police the police, but the point is they didn't say, let's do without one of the police. They never argued that. They argued it's absolutely required in some format, whatever it might be. Because everybody knows, and today we're even more selfish than ever. So that selfishness leads to problems. If you don't have people looking out for those who potentially don't have the power and capacity to deal with issues themselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave you with that. Hopefully you've understood our system because we don't teach it. Hopefully you've understood what problems we have in the world and how we begin to skew ourselves. Never hear Keir, they called him, but we skew ourselves externally here in the United Kingdom to be important. So that's why Keir was never in the United Kingdom. So because it's skewed towards external importance. You know, let's put in the papers Keir's important, and then he'll forget everything else of the country that's crumbling. Okay? The King of the North needs to be the King of the UK, not just the King of the North, but he does need to redispute and reorientate the United Kingdom in a way that it's not just London and South East centric. He does need to do that, but in a sensible way, not a gimmicky way. So best of luck to you, Mr. New Prime Minister, and to you, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you'll listen again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.